Shotguns are legal. Sawed-off shotguns are not legal. The National Firearms Act of 1934 put in place new federal rules, again, 1934, against owning whole big classes of weapons and weapons accessories that were believed to be associated with serious crime. So that 1934 law included things like machine guns and silencers and sawed-off shotguns. And now, just because I just said that small sequence of sentences, all the gun people are now going to write me really pedantic, misspelled, threatening letters telling me that I've explained this in a way that they do not like. I welcome your hate mail. Bring it on. But frankly, the bottom line truth for most Americans is that for 87 freaking years now, U.S. law says you can't have a sawed-off shotgun. You cannot shorten the barrel of your shotgun to be 18 inches or less because crime. But this being the United States of America, in which we are not really allowed to have rationally derived public policy about guns, even though sawed-off shotguns have been illegal in this country for almost 90 years, some genius has nevertheless invented, marketed, and now legally sells in the United States, I kid you not, a shotgun revolver. It's a handgun, a huge oversized handgun, a huge oversized revolver with a giant oversized cylinder big enough to take shotgun shells. So you can't have a sawed-off shotgun in this country with a barrel shorter than 18 inches, but for some reason you can have a shotgun revolver with a barrel length of 2.5 inches, which, yes, does lead instantly to lots of 2.5-inch barrel jokes about the kinds of guys who want to buy this kind of cartoon laughingstock overcompensating small man gun. But it is a handgun. It is a sort of pitifully tumescent, ridiculous cantaloupe of a handgun into which you really can load shotgun shells or very large-sized bullets. And on January 6th this year, prosecutors now say that a 56-year-old man from Indiana brought that kind of a ridiculous gun, loaded, brought it to the U.S. Capitol. Here's Kyle Cheney at Politico.com today on what the man told police investigators he intended to do with that gun at the Capitol on January 6th. Quote, an Indiana man charged with carrying a loaded firearm into the Capitol on January 6th told investigators that if he had found Speaker Nancy Pelosi, quote, you'd be here for another reason. This guy's essentially saying, hey, if I'd found Nancy Pelosi that day, you guys would be here for another reason now, meaning you'd be here to arrest me for killing her. This man, quote, allegedly carried a Taurus revolver, which is capable of firing shotgun shells, 2 of which were in the chamber, along with 3 hollow point bullets. It's a 5-shot revolver, apparently had 2 shotgun shells loaded and 3 hollow points. A Capitol Police sergeant obtained the weapon after allegedly fending off an assault from the man. Quote, according to the charging documents filed in the case over the weekend, 2 Capitol Police investigators visited the man at his home in Shelbyville, Indiana on March 29th. And he admitted to them that he had gone to the Stop the Steal rally in the Capitol on January 6th and then marched to the U.S. Capitol building. The man told investigators as they prepared to finish their interview with him, quote, I thought Nan and I would hit it off. Nan as in Nancy Pelosi. Quote, I was glad I didn't, meaning I didn't find her, because you'd be here for another reason. And I told my kids that if they show up, I'm surrendering. Nope, they can have me because I may go down a hero. So the man is armed with a revolver, a ridiculous, oversized, cartoonish revolver into which he has loaded both shotgun shells and hollow point bullets. He says he was looking for Nancy Pelosi inside the U.S. Capitol that day. He's glad he didn't find her because if he had, then, well, he'd be surrendering to those police since they'd be there to arrest him for killing her, and he'd be surrendering to them because he's pretty sure that at least some of America would consider him a hero for having done that, for having shot the Speaker of the House. I mean, the reason he got the gun taken off him January 6th is that he allegedly assaulted a police officer who then took it from him. But I mean, I'm just going to point out here, number one, the guy was not arrested on January 6th, even though that day he allegedly assaulted an officer and he in fact had a loaded gun on him that the police officer took off him. After that, he walks away. And number two, Capitol Police investigators went to his home in Indiana and talked to him about his role in January 6th in March. During that interview, he volunteered to them that, yes, he'd been in the Capitol, and yes, he'd been looking for Nancy Pelosi, and yeah, if he'd found her that day, they'd be there to arrest him for killing her. And he didn't say that in some encrypted forum that investigators have just gained access to, and that's why they've arrested him now. He told that to police officers in March, 8 months ago. And they had his loaded gun, which he had had with him at the Capitol when he allegedly assaulted a police officer. And the man was just charged now. Nice life if you can get it, right? And I will tell you, this is new today about the guy with the loaded shotgun shell revolver hunting House Speaker Nancy Pelosi inside the Capitol on January 6th, saying he would have killed her if he'd found her. This is new. If it doesn't sound new to you, if it sounds familiar, it's because while this actually is a brand new story, it rhymes with a lot of other ones recently. I mean, here's BuzzFeed reporter Salvador Hernandez more than 2 months ago. September 10th this year, quote, a man who threatened to shoot House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in the head on live television in the aftermath of the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol pleaded guilty today to a felony. The man drove from Colorado to Washington, D.C. to take part in the January 6th rallies protesting the results of the presidential election. Officials say he arrived hauling a trailer, a rifle, a Glock 9mm handgun, 10 large-capacity magazines, and more than 2,500 rounds of ammunition. According to a federal indictment, he told a relative that he'd headed to D.C. with a bleep ton of armor-piercing ammo. The day after the January 6th Capitol attack, he texted a family member that he was thinking about heading over to Pelosi Bleep's speech and putting a bullet in her noggin on live TV. Yeah, that's not the same guy with the shotgun shell revolver. That's a different guy who pled guilty September 10th. Then 2.5 weeks later, yet another different person. Here's Marshall Cohen reporting at CNN. A Doylestown, Pennsylvania woman who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th and said she had been looking for Nancy Pelosi to, quote, shoot her in the frigging brain, pleaded guilty today to a low-level misdemeanor for unlawfully protesting on restricted grounds. Low-level misdemeanor she pled to. But that's not to be confused with the shotgun shell revolver guy or the guy who had all of those other types of weapons, who said he was going to put a bullet in Nancy Pelosi on live television. Now, this woman who was also going to put a bullet in Nancy Pelosi, that's a separate one. And then, here's another one. This was just Friday this past week. Arizona man convicted after threatening Pelosi with "I'm coming to kill you" message. An Arizona man who left a message telling House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, "I'm coming to kill you," was convicted Thursday, just last week, for communicating an interstate threat, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Arizona. So those are all different people, all different cases. And if this is still sounding familiar, it might be because when Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene was stripped of all her committee assignments back in February, one of the reasons why was her liking a post on social media that called for putting a bullet in Nancy Pelosi's head. All separate incidents, all different people. Some of them get kicked off their committees in Congress. Some of them get misdemeanors. Occasionally we get pleading guilty to a felony. It's all different people. And it's weird. It's almost like there's some sort of echo chamber for these kinds of very specific threats, right? Since they're all threatening the exact same thing against the exact same Democrat. It's just an amazing time we live in to read, polite profiles of how Nancy Pelosi has been working the phones to try to get Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to support President Biden's legislative agenda in Congress. Well, all the while, on the regular, one after another, committed Trump supporters is brought up on charges of making concerted and in some cases armed death threats against her. She sort of proceeds with her work. But there's a whole industry of Trump supporters making more or less credible, in some cases, armed threats against Speaker Pelosi's life while she does her work. It's an amazing time we live in.